by seeing how awake you are. Okay? No, not jumping jacks. I want to play a very short clip from the presentation that Dr. David Gushee made. Now, I mentioned Dr. Gushee yesterday, or this afternoon. Dr. Gushee is, well, when he came out as an ally, he's not a homosexual, but he came out as an ally of Matthew Vines and the gay Christian movement. All the advertisements said he was one of America's best-known ethicists and so on and so forth. And I was like, really? Okay. I guess that, all right. Never heard of him, but that's okay. He teaches at Mercer University in Georgia. And, made a big, huge splash, and everybody's going, see, here we go. This is, and he gave a presentation at the Reformation Conference. Matthew Vines has named his group the Reformation Project, which I think is an incredibly horrible misnomer, but we'll let that pass for the moment. And I did, as I said, a 4-hour response to his 1-hour presentation. But I just wanted to see how awake everybody is, because I want you to listen to this one little clip and then tell me what is amazingly ironic and, in fact, humorous about what he says here. All right? Now, it took me playing this 3 times for a certain group of people earlier, so and they will remain nameless. You only get one shot, so you got to listen carefully. Here's David Gushee. Listen to what he has to say, and see if you can see what the issue here is.
If we allow people to move the debate to the margins, in a sense, we're giving up ground we shouldn't give up. What does it mean to be a follower of Jesus? It looks more like that. And then when we're challenged,
I think I went to the wrong spot. Hold on. Let's try it there.
No.
Yeah, here we go. It's hard to control it.
I mean, it isn't like there are very many Christians who wake up in the morning saying, how am I going to live my life today? What's going to be central for me treating people right and following Jesus? They don't go to Leviticus 18. They just don't. They go to take up your cross and follow me, love your neighbor as yourself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and all kinds of other richly meaningful central themes. If we allow people...
No, stop that. Now, how many of you heard me play this before? I only want people who don't already know, didn't already catch this, I didn't already tell you. This is the first time you've seen it. What strikes you as amazingly ironic about that? Exactly. Love your neighbor as yourself is Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18, which is smack dab in between Leviticus 18:22 and Leviticus 20:13. And so he's saying, we don't need to be going to the holiness code. We need to be quoting from it. And he obviously did not catch it because he's only thinking about Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself, not even realizing that Jesus is pulling that directly from the holiness code itself. And you read Leviticus 18, 19, and 20. Leviticus 19, where it's drawn from, has all this material about honoring father and mother and taking care of the poor and paying a fair wage and all this stuff that these folks would all say is actually, attacked by that bug again, that these folks would all say is absolutely vitally important. But they have to dismiss it because, well, it's in between those other texts, and we have to get people as far away from Leviticus 18 and 19 as we possibly can. So there's David Gushee, and when I first heard that, I was just like, you have got to be kidding me, my goodness. All right. I promised that I was going to show this to you. I wish the quality was better. We had horrible problems with the sound on this as well. This was 2001, so things have gotten a little bit better over time. I'm a little bit bigger in this debate. This was in my weightlifting years. So some people said I did that just to try to intimidate people, and that's not the case. But I was a big boy. Anyway, Barry Lynn is the head of Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. He's an ACLU attorney. He has testified before Congress that child pornography is a free speech right. And yet when we had this debate and he lost so badly, he was so angry by the end of it with the audience, because he's used to going on CNN and getting these little softball questions, and he wasn't really used to doing a serious debate. And this was while I had just pretty much finished writing most of my portion of the same-sex controversy. So he was really angry, and so within a few days afterwards, we get this official note saying that there will be no reproduction of this event and no distribution of this event, and threatening to file suit against us in the Ninth Circuit Court to suppress the videotapes of this debate. So child pornography is a free speech right, but me getting creamed in a debate is not a free speech right at all. So as is normal with folks on the left, those rights are only for people in their group. People outside their group, not so much. So why can we have it now? Well, back then it was called Alliance Defense Fund. Now it's Alliance Defending Freedom, ADF. Came to our aid, and in fact, there were a lot of Christian attorneys that were almost lined up to go after Barry Lynn. It's like, oh, Barry Lynn, cool, this will be fun. And we filed in Virginia, which is where you're supposed to file for copyright issues anyways. And it was the natural place, this was in New York, that also would have had jurisdiction in that area. We all know why he wanted to file in the Ninth Circuit, or the Ninth Circus, as it is often called, which unfortunately Arizona is in the Ninth Circus. But the day before our attorneys were going to show up at his office for depositions, he caved, and for the grand total of $1, we bought the rights for distribution to this video. So it's out there if you want to see it. But as I said, he showed up to a debate, and the topic of the debate was, is homosexuality consistent with biblical Christianity? And he showed up to the debate without a Bible. And about, I forget when I debated John Shelby Spong. I think it was 2008, 2009, somewhere around there. 6, 7, 8 years later, I debate Bishop Spong, same topic, this time in Florida, and he shows up, no Bible. Does not bother to bring a Bible to a debate on whether homosexuality is consistent with biblical Christianity. It's just amazing. You'll get to see that he has to borrow mine. But what's interesting about this, no, seriously, what's interesting is this is on Romans 1. This is on first chapter of Romans, and I'm just asking him questions, and it illustrates the truth of the text in Proverbs chapter 18. The first one to present his case sounds right until his neighbor comes along to question him. That's what makes debate so useful, is that you can always make your position sound good until someone comes along and makes you answer questions. That's why if there's no cross-examination, there's no debate. It's just competing sound bites. So since we did Romans 1 this afternoon, here is the cross-examination. I'll just do the part where I'm asking him questions on Romans chapter 1. And see if you can't sense some growing consternation, maybe a little frustration on the part of Reverend Lynn, who is an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, who at one point during this debate said that Paul was over the top in the book of Galatians, and that he can receive revelation on the same level that Paul did, which is very interesting, but he's not a Mormon. Anyway, here we go.
Are outside the culture, or they can also, by virtue of their idolatry, commit wickedness and sin.
Okay, I'm sorry.
They can do either one.
And I guess
Here we go.
in Romans chapter 1, you had indicated in your interpretation, and I guess this is good to go directly into that.
Sure.
You said that unnatural is not necessarily evil, that these actions are simply unexpected. So is it your perspective that in Paul's words in Romans chapter 1, that he is simply saying that the homosexual, both lesbian and male homosexual activities of verses 26 and 27, that these are simply unexpected actions?
There are two lists in Romans. There are two lists. One is, I believe, a list that is in the category of unnatural, that is to say, rare occurrences. and others are wicked sins, which he puts in a different category. I read the context of that letter and that passage as containing two different kinds of lists of what he sees as wrong. One is wrong because it is unnaturally rare. The other is wrong because it is wicked and sinful.
Okay, in verse 26, Paul says, "For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passions." Could you explain from the text what "for this reason" means? How is it connected with what came before?
Well, because he's talking about them as he's talking about idolaters, and he said those who commit this sin, this wickedness of idolatry, do two things. Number one, they can do two things. They can, one, do things that are outside of the norms of the society. They are outside the culture. Or they can also, by virtue of their idolatry, commit wickedness and sin. They can do either one. They can fall into either or both.
So in when it says in verse 24, "Therefore God gave them over," and then verse 26, "This reason God gave them over," using the exact same Greek verb paradidomi. You're saying that it's a different "them" in verse 24 as in verse 26?
No, it's the same. Well, it actually is a different "them" because some are described as those who are performing that which is uncommonplace, and often, by the way, unclean. And then there are others that are wicked. There are two lists in that passage that we're talking about.
So even though he uses the exact same words, you are insisting that the text tells us that there is a complete disjunction between the two. And
it was intended, if he wanted there to be a single list and every act that was wrong was in the same list, there would be no need for two lists. There would be one list. These are the things that have happened because of this idolatry. He does not do that. He specifically has two lists, and I would suggest again that people go back, read the text, and see if you think there is a reason for that difference.
what is a degrading passion, sir?
What is a degrading passion?
For this reason, God gave them over to degrading passion.
Well, I think any lustful sexual activity of any kind is included as a degrading passion.
Are those sinful? Degrading passions?
Not necessarily, no.
So you can degrade someone in your passion, but that's not necessarily sinful?
Could I just see the text? Maybe we could add a few sentences here, because I do want to do this.
Verse 26, sir. That's the small print edition.
This is the very, very, very strange.
It's
in the same.
It says, "For God gave them over to degrading passions."
Right. I think that is.
That's patheotemias.
Yes. I believe that it is very hard to read this. I must admit.
It says, "For even their women exchanged."
Yeah. No. I believe that is in the category, as I reread, is in the category of those unnatural acts, which are not the same as being filled with wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, gossip, slanders, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful,
So degrading
inventors of
passions
evil.
are not sins.
They're not in the same category, or he would have put them in the same list. I mean, again, I just ask you, look at the structure.
Right.
You can decide that Dr. White is correct about it. I believe that there are two distinct events that can occur in the life of the idolater. And that is, one, to engage in these passions, these unclean acts, and secondly, to engage in the sins, the list of which I've just read.
Are all possible sins listed in 28 through 32?
Well, one would hope not, because then there would be acts that are occurring today, for example, that would not be considered sinful because they aren't mentioned there.
So
using heroin, for example.
So Paul did not say that these are the only sins.
No,
of an
no,
idolater.
he didn't, but I think the structure makes it absolutely clear. I mean, I don't know how many times to say this, that he has two distinct lists. One is a greater sin, one is wickedness and evil and sin, and the other is falling away as an idolater into unclean practices.
Well, you know, when you go to a debate on the subject of is homosexuality consistent with biblical Christianity, bring a biblical. Okay, that would really, really help. Didn't do that, and so there you go. And that was sort of how the whole debate went, and I don't think that's what he was expecting at all. All right, one last thing here. Want to, as we sort of wrap things up. We started last evening by looking at Graham Codrington's opening statement. Since we are again dealing with Romans 1, this is another spin on Romans 1 that you might want to be prepared for. This was in his closing statement, and so what I want to do is play his comments. He asks a series of questions. Ask yourself how you would respond to what he says in light of what we did this afternoon. If you weren't here this afternoon, okay. But ask yourself, all right, how would I answer each of these questions as he presents them? And then what I did, since I went last, was I went ahead and answered the questions that he asked as best I could. I mean, you got to realize he's going through these fairly quickly, and I'm trying to write them down and summarize them, have zero time to think whatsoever about what the answer is going to be, but I took the risk anyways. So this will help us to, I think, solidify some of what we were looking at this afternoon.
So in conclusion, I just want to go back to God's Word, especially to the book of Romans, where we were finishing our questions. And I want to ask you just 8 simple questions. I'm going to put these up on my blog. It's going to be in the video that will be available, the audio of this, so you can go back to these in your own time, but here they are. Reading Romans. Question 1. Do the homosexuals you know worship little statues of animals, birds, and reptiles? You cannot take some parts of this passage literally and then ignore the others. If you know of gay people who are worshipping idols, tell them to stop. It's wrong. God's word is against it. By the way, that's true of your heterosexual friends too. Secondly, do the homosexuals you know flaunt their sexuality shamelessly? Do they have degrading passions? Do they make a public spectacle of it? Christians are called to modesty and decorum. If you know shameless gay people, tell them to stop. It's wrong. By the way, this applies to your heterosexual friends too. Thirdly, are the homosexuals you know out of control sexually? Are they promiscuous and lewd? Are they inflamed with lust? Does their sexuality both dominate and define and control them? If so, tell them to stop. It's wrong. By the way, this applies to your heterosexual friends too. Fourthly, are the homosexuals you know acting contrary to their natures? Are they experimenting with homosexuality, just trying it out? Are they really just heterosexuals, who are confused or going through a phase? If so, tell them to stop. It's wrong. Fifthly, do the homosexuals you know appear to be homosexual because God is punishing them? And if so, for what? Sixthly, are the homosexuals you know descending into moral chaos? Are they exhibiting total antisocial and unethical behavior? Go and read Romans 1. Look at that list. See the progression. And ask, are the homosexuals you know descending into moral chaos? Are they so entirely devoid of empathy and love and compassion and mercy that we can't even call them human anymore. Does this characterize the homosexuals you know? That's what Paul says is going to happen. If you believe the traditional view, that's what's going to happen. Is it happening? By their fruit you will know them. 7. In Romans chapter 2, Paul says this. You may be saying, what terrible people you've been talking about. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. You can read whatever version you like. It will be fine. But you are just as bad. You have no excuse. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you are condemning yourself, because you do these very same things. Do you? If you know what Paul was talking about, do you really? And we know that God in his justice will punish anyone who does these things. Do you think that God will judge and condemn others for doing them and not judge and condemn you too? Don't you realize how kind, tolerant, patient God is with you? Don't you care? Can't you see how kind he has been in giving you time to turn from your sin? But no, you won't listen. So you're storing up terrible punishment for yourself. Seriously, how do you respond to that? When you judge your homosexual brothers and sisters and friends. 8thly, have a look for me, please, at Romans 14, verses 13 and 14. How do you respond to this? I'll read this time from the NIV. Therefore, and this therefore, I think, is actually a therefore that comes at the end of the whole book. The whole book of Romans is focused on the single issue of the distance between Jews and Gentiles. Paul is coming to Rome. 5 years before writing this letter, the Jews had been hounded out of Rome by the emperor. A year or two before he writes the letter, the Jews are allowed back into Rome. And they come back into a church that was the only church at that time that had been built up by Gentile leaders, and had taken a slightly different path in their view around food, in their view around the Jewish calendar, in their view around circumcision. And Paul wants these Jews and Gentiles to play nice with each other. Because in Antioch, it just blew up. It was him and Peter had the biggest argument ever. It threatened to split the church just years after Jesus had left. And Paul does not want this to happen. This is the purpose of this letter to the people in Rome. And so he gets to his main point. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in the way of a brother or sister. I am convinced, being totally persuaded in the Lord Jesus, that nothing is unclean in itself. How do you respond to Romans 14, 13 to 14? Let me finish. What can we say about these wonderful things? I'm reading from Romans chapter 8. If God is for us, who can ever be against us? Since God himself did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, won't God, who gave us Christ, also give us everything? Who dares accuse to whom God has chosen for his own? Will God? No. He is the one who has given us the right. Who then will condemn us? Will Jesus condemn us? No. For he is the one who died for us and raised us to life, and is sitting in the place of honor next to God. Can anyone separate us from the love of God? Tonight's debate has been approached dispassionately. I've approached it as requested and as guided by the format. But my heart bleeds for my gay and lesbian brothers and sisters. I'm sorry I couldn't bring emotion to this debate on your behalf, for we have hurt you. But God loves you. God made you. God loves you not in spite of who you are. He loves you because of who you are. And he wants you home. Obey his law. Do the right things. But God loves you.
Thank you, Dr. Codrington. Now, Dr. White, for his last 10 minutes. Let me respond to all the questions. There was a very emotional appeal given that we need to change. That same movement is now happening with other groups as well. The same process that has brought us to this night is now happening in regards to intergenerational sexual activity. And the very same words could be uttered in defense of numerous other perspectives with just as much an emotion and just as much an appeal. Does a person have to worship a reptile to have degrading passions? Of course not. It is an absurd reading of Paul to say that every person that he's discussing will engage in every activity he's discussing. Just as it is painfully obvious that in the vice list at the end of the chapter, he is not saying that every person he's discussing does every single activity to the nth degree. There are many people who engage in violence who have great respect for their parents. This is a gross mishandling of the text. Number 2, do they flaunt their sexuality shamelessly? Ever been to San Francisco? Ever seen a gay pride march? Oh, we're not talking about them. Why aren't you talking about them? That seems to be the vast majority. Well, we're only talking about a small minority, okay? I think it is flaunting your sexuality when you demand the church redefine marriage so that you can engage in that activity. That's flaunting, especially when it ends up changing how our society deals with the subject of marriage. Are they out of control sexually? What does that mean? If the sexual desire is provided by God and must be determined by His parameters, then yes, they are. Because they are desiring sexual activity with a mirror image. That is out of control. Number 4, are they acting contrary to nature, to phusis? I obviously disagree that God, by phusis, by nature, creates someone to experience and to act upon homosexual desires. I'm not saying there aren't people who do not have same-sex attraction. I know that there are. It's a fallen world. It's not kata phusis. It's not according to nature. Number 5, is God punishing them? Well, how do we know when anything is punishment in this world? When you see a tsunami, you know that God's wrath is being revealed from heaven, but do you know that it's the same kind of wrath that's being dispensed to each person who experiences that tsunami? No, you don't know that. But what does it mean to be given over to something? What did that mean? I pointed out that even though Graham was trying to cut that text into parts and say, well, it's all progression, this is, all of it is in the paradidomi, paretoken. He gave people over. What does that mean? Does it always look the same for every person? No, it doesn't. Number 6, are they descending into moral chaos to where we would not even call them human? Again, this is the idea that you've got to go through all of Romans 1, and this is going to be experienced by every single individual. That is a gross misreading of the text. Just as the final question is a gross misreading of the text. Look at all of the classic commentaries, and you can say, oh, they all got it wrong. Okay, fine. But I don't just think standing here asserting it proves it. But look at the classic commentaries. What's Romans 14 about? It's about inter-Christian experience. Do not judge your fellow servant of Jesus Christ in these particular areas. He's not talking about Romans 1. He's not talking about the things that he laid out there. That is a gross misuse and misreading of the book of Romans. And which one of us actually can walk through Romans, verse by verse, point by point, and be consistent in the exegesis that we use? You are the audience this evening. You get to answer that particular question. I asked Graham, why didn't Jesus say anything? He said, well, Jesus didn't say anything about Caesar, slavery. Jesus, from our belief, is their maker and their creator. And you're going to tell me that knowing that he made these people with this deep desire for this monogamous relationship, which as any fair analysis will say is a small minority of what calls itself the homosexual community today. A small minority. But Jesus knew that he made these people this way, and yet he reinforced the stereotypes? What Jesus said about Caesar was radical. Render the things to Caesar that are Caesar's, things that are God's that are God's. That was a radical statement. Jesus was willing to make radical statements, just as he was about women as well. I'm sorry. It doesn't make any sense to me to say what.
Okay, so there you go. Hopefully you caught especially what I said there about his horrific misuse of Romans chapter 14. To say that that's the center of the epistle, and that this is how Paul is trying to keep the Jews and the Gentiles, from two different churches developing. Complete misreading of that text. My goodness, Romans 14 is about those issues that were dividing Christians, about eating meat sacrificed to idols and things like that, and areas of Christian freedom, which we might call adiaphora, and not damaging your brother or your sister by the exercise of your own Christian freedom. Paul had finished the theological elements of that letter specifically in chapter 11. Chapters 12 and following are the practical exhortations and applications. It's just you have to absolutely tear the text apart to come up with what you just heard from Dr. Codrington. But that's exactly what takes place. Now, I do want to address something that came up in that last issue that we've not addressed. And my intention is sometime, Lord willing, toward the beginning of, I don't know. I'm teaching for 2 weeks. I'm teaching at RTS in January, and then I'm doing the G3 conference in Atlanta the week after that, and so January is going to be rough. But somewhere around in there, or in February, I want to do at least 1 or 2 Sunday school lessons. I cannot figure out how to make this a sermon. I'm not much of a preacher to begin with, and it's been challenging me beyond my capacities to try to turn some of the studies in Leviticus and Deuteronomy into sermons. So I've already told my folks that one of the key issues that we need to address, that I'm going to do in the context of a Sunday school lesson or series of lessons, is the subject of slavery. Because the argument that you've heard a number of times, and that you will hear a number of times, is that the issue of homosexuality is parallel to the issue of slavery. That the church has been wrong on numerous issues down through the centuries. You remember last night Graham Codrington gave a whole list, which he included purgatory and things like that. But issue of women, and obviously I'm not sure what he's referring to specifically, but I would imagine he is very much opposed to complementarianism and is an egalitarian as far as that goes. But always the issue of slavery is brought up as an example of where the church was wrong, and then it got right. And so the 18th century is where the church got it right, and so there had to be a change, and now the 21st century is where the church is going to get it right regarding homosexuality as well. Now, like I said, it's a huge issue. We don't have time to unpack about all of it tonight, but I would just want to raise some particular issues here. First of all, unfortunately, in our context, when someone uses the term slavery, thanks to our educational system, automatically only one form of slavery is considered, and that is the American form of slavery from the 19th century. And very few people have almost any knowledge whatsoever of what the difference is between what would be called chattel property slavery in the 16th through the 19th centuries, not only in the United States, but in Britain, in Africa, amongst Muslim nations, et cetera, et cetera. The differences between that and what existed, for example, in the Roman Empire during the days of Jesus, which, of course, many of the early Christians were, in fact, slaves. And there's only one term for slave or servant in the New Testament, doulos doulé, for the feminine form. But and so there were clear differences between Roman slavery and the modern forms, and then even more differences between that and the Hebrew form of slavery that we can discern the outlines of, especially in Deuteronomy, but also in some other of the books of the law. What is very clear is that the slavery of the Old Testament was far more a parallel to our social safety nets than anything else. It was a means of staying alive when nothing else was going to do it. The economies of that day did not produce the idea. We don't realize how amazingly unusual it is to have the massive amounts of excess food that our societies produce in the West every single day. And so if you became marginalized, if you became separated from your family unit, if you experienced anything along those lines, you could be right on the edge of starvation very, very quickly. And so the form of slavery that existed within Israel, now there's two kinds of slavery very clearly pointed out. There's one that was how an Israelite was to treat a fellow Israelite, which was based upon the Jubilee system. And so it could only last for 6 years. The 7th year, you would be set free. But you could sell yourself into slavery as a subsistence methodology, and there were rules as to how you had to be respected and how you had to eventually be freed and how you had to be treated and so on and so forth. But an Israelite could buy a foreign slave that was not subject to the Jubilee release, but that was almost always because of situations of war. And in that situation, the reason you would not release that person is because of the way the societies were in that day. They would still be they would still have an allegiance to your enemy. So it'd be like importing enemies into your own borders and then letting them go free while they're still pledged to be your enemies. So there was that issue that does sort of exist in some places in the world today, but not so much in the West any longer. We don't have that kind of allegiance, pledge, tribal type thinking that they had at that particular point in time. But the point is that the slavery of the Old Testament was fundamentally different and was a means by which a person could avoid the loss of life. Now, Roman slavery did not have the safeguards. You remember the ceremony with the awl in the ear in the Old Testament? A lot of people aren't familiar with that. But if you sold yourself into slavery and you found that situation in that family to be something that you wanted to continue, that you loved the one that you had sold yourself in servitude to, you found them to be fair, you found them to, maybe they were just a whole lot better at business than you were in the first place, and you had found yourself in a good position, when the year of Jubilee came, you could say, I don't want to leave. I want to remain in this position for the rest of my life. And an awl would be put through your ear. This was the mark that you had accepted this position, and you would not be freed at the next Jubilee. You would stay in that situation, but the whole context of that would be because you wanted to. It was your choice to stay in that situation. And so when people say, well, yeah, see, the church is all wrong on slavery. Well, what church? What church are we talking about? When we come to the New Testament, the apostles do say to slaves, honor your masters. But again, in that situation, basically what people are saying is, well, you should have, if the New Testament is God's word, then there should have been an immediate wholesale call for revolution of all slaves in the Roman Empire. If slavery is wrong, then that's what should have been done at that point in time. And of course, once again, that would have resulted in what? Not only the mass extermination as had happened. Remember Spartacus? That was actually based upon a historical event. Not only would have resulted in the mass extermination of large numbers of people, but again, in that context, in those cultures, even if there had been a successful dismantling of slavery, that slavery provided subsistence existence for many people that they would not have been able to have otherwise. So it would have resulted in mass deaths. So it's a different situation in the ancient world. People today so often take modern contexts and transport them back into the ancient world and try to judge people back then based upon the situations we have today, and it simply doesn't work. A lot of people are not taught how to do serious history anymore, unfortunately. And so there's all those differences that existed in the first place between ancient forms and the more modern form that we're familiar with within the United States. And so when most of the time when this is raised, it is raised as an emotional issue. It is raised to win an argument by going, you can't say anything positive about slavery in the Bible. You cannot contextualize it. No one will allow you to do that. So I win automatically. And therefore, I'm going to take that emotional win and transfer it over and say, now we're doing the same thing with homosexuality. It doesn't work for far too many reasons, but when I say it doesn't work, I don't mean that there aren't people who have gone, I think that's right. I think I'm going to go. It has. I say it doesn't work as far as a truthful analysis of the biblical text. But it does certainly work as far as an emotional type of argument that would take place. The New Testament clearly lays foundation of encouraging those who were in the situation of slavery in Rome to be witnesses to Christ, to seek their freedom if they can obtain it, but to show respect. Those who owned slaves were to show respect to those slaves and again, remember, the relationship was different at that time than it is now, than it was in the modern period. And so, unfortunately, people just will not allow that kind of logical, rational contextualization to take place when it comes down to the issue of slavery. But the fact of the matter is, there is a long history throughout the history of the church of a call for not only the equality of the races, but for an abolishment of any kind of what became chattel slavery. When chattel slavery began to develop primarily out of Muslim lands in Africa, I was in Malaga, Spain, earlier this year, doing I don't know if any of you saw the televised debate I did with the Roman Catholic priests there, but I was running by the seashore, and Malaga's right on the seashore, and so it's sort of fun running along the seashore. It's you start hearing chariots of fire in your ears, as of course when you're running as slowly as I am, it's in slow motion, But anyway, I noticed that one of the things they mentioned were these lookout towers that were along the coast there in Spain, and when I inquired about them, they were meant to watch for Muslim raiders coming across the Mediterranean, and they would raid villages and grab Europeans and then sell them into slavery in Africa. That's how it worked, and unfortunately, that part of the story gets lost most of the time. That's even different than how the Romans did it. Most of the time, Roman slavery would very often be related to military situations, deportation of military-age people and certain people to help control certain areas under the far-flung empire. There were all sorts of other issues that were involved that we can't get into this evening, but Christians throughout the history of the Christian church were involved in calling for equality. Now, when you talk about the church, very often they'll talk about Rome, and they'll hold us accountable for Rome. Codrington did. He mentioned purgatory as one of the sins of the church. Excuse me? That's Rome, baby. That's don't lay that at my foot. You may want to take some credit for that, but not me and not my forefathers either, for that matter. But Rome had, you look at the Crusades and stuff like that, and I'm a little concerned these days. There's a new crusaderism developing amongst some Christians, trying to rehabilitate the Crusades and say they were a great, wonderful thing, and it was just a military thing, and the Muslims had invaded Christian lands, and so they were just going back. Read a little closer. Look at the Children's Crusade. Look at the crusade that was supposed to go to the Holy Land and instead hung a left and sacked Constantinople, eventually weakening them so that they fell to the Ottoman Turks and all the rest of that kind of stuff. It's a little scary what's going on. The people going, let's get our swords and go back to the Middle Ages and start fighting the Muslims stuff is an amazing thing. But anyways, the crusades called for by the popes and the indulgences that were given, if you die wearing the cross, you get a plenary indulgence and all the rest of that kind of stuff. Again, is that what we're supposed to take credit for or responsibility for or something along those lines? I certainly hope not. But unlike homosexuality, there has always been those who have emphasized the need for brotherly existence of all believers in Jesus Christ within the church, from the beginning all the way through. And that's not what you will find in regards to homosexuality. So if you're going to say, well, there's a parallel here, well, show me the text that we misunderstood in regards to slavery. Oh, I know that there were, I'm well aware you can make arguments, and the people in the South made arguments. But are you saying they made good exegetical arguments? The fact of the matter is they didn't. If you've looked at them, they're horrible arguments and would not have survived a meaningful debate. But so far, all the people I've debated on homosexuality, the reverse has been true. Theirs are the arguments that can't survive cross-examination and cannot survive meaningful exegetical analysis, which is why people like Vines and Brownson and others won't debate. They will not engage on that level because only in a monologue does that stuff actually work. So it depends on what issue they want to try to raise. Sometimes they'll raise cosmological issues and heliocentrism and geocentrism and all the rest of that kind of stuff. The fact of the matter is, the only reason that they make that kind of argument is because of the clarity of the biblical testimony, positively and negatively, on the subject of homosexuality. That's just simply what they have to do to try to get around what the scriptures actually state. Okay? All right. I haven't taken questions all the way through, and I would imagine that you probably have at least some. Please make sure that a question has a thing called a question mark at the end. And please attempt to be brief and concise. I am fairly expert now at recognizing people who want to pontificate, who feel that they should have been the one making the presentation, or who are about to begin to enunciate a personal revelation that they themselves have received from God. I will cut you off, okay? That's not why everyone has come here. So if you have a question, make it a question. Otherwise, we will be moving on, and you may hate me forever, but you know what? My life will continue. So we'll go on from there. So hey, you're right down front. So that's and the T-shirt over the long sleeve shirt thing. That's really you've got to be comfortable in your style to do that kind of thing. Sort of like me and my Kuji. So I think that's cool. No, it's not. No, it's not like me and my Kuji. Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
The Metropolitan Church.
Mm-hmm.
They have 800 members.
800 members?
No, I'm sorry, 800 churches.
Right. I was going to say they have more than that. Yeah. Metropolitan Community Church.
Metropolitan Community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm more interested in how you think we should evaluate them. Should we probably evaluate them as genuine Christians who are in need of discipline?
No.
No.
Metropolitan Community Church is a church of Satan. How is that? Clear enough? Do I need to clarify that? The Reformers referred to Rome as a synagogue of Satan. Same thing. This is a false church. This is a heretical church. If you really read some of the stuff they've produced, I could not even repeat some of the stuff that has come out of the Metropolitan Church in the context of this conference because it is so blasphemous and so disgusting. So this is a church defined by deviant sexuality, period, end of discussion. It is not a Christian church. How's that? Hey, at least I'm straightforward. But I think I could defend that. Yes, sir.
Since homosexuality has been put into the identity box instead of sexual behavior, what
Right. Yeah, I mean, it really does require the presentation of a Christian worldview that if they're operating on the basis of the idea that we have the autonomy to define our own existence. I mean, if they think there's someone named Caitlyn Jenner rather than Bruce Jenner, then there's a fundamental worldview divide between us because they have made identity something that is self-defined and is fact malleable based upon what decisions I make for this day. And from the Christian perspective, God is the one who defines mankind. He is our creator. He is our maker. And as I said on the Dr. Drew show, I think that the one who died and rose again the third day has a whole lot more authority in this issue than any one of us. And he's the one that said, from the beginning, God made them male and female, and he laid out the parameters for their behavior. And as a result, I think the embracing of the wildly nihilistic worldview that is so prevalent today is resulting in a moral chaos that makes even the discussion of this matter next to impossible. If we can't even have a discussion about it anymore, it is dehumanizing both of us. If we're facing situations now where we can't even figure out whether you need to have a urinal on the wall or not in a room, we have lost a fundamental, basic element of civilization itself. And so, one thing, the one thing always to remember, though, and sometimes I have to remind myself of this, and have to hold on to it. Especially at my age, I feel such a huge chasm has developed between my generation and now the younger generation, that at times I just feel like we're living on different planets and we're speaking different languages and we have a completely different past. So many, you young folks, study history. You are not alone. You are a part of a long history. It is so many of the young folks that I know today do not see where they stand in history, do not see what has come before them, how they stand on the shoulders of giants and things like that. And so they think that they have this autonomous ability to just redefine their own reality without recognizing how much they owe to those who've come before them and how great those people that came before them were. And so in speaking to someone, I have to always remind myself, this person is created in the image of God. That's the contact point. There is no moral neutral point. There is no point of neutrality that we can both jump onto this morally neutral plane and I can reason from there. That is a myth. That's a myth from the Christian perspective especially. We believe Jesus Christ created all things. Every fact that is a fact because Jesus made it that way. So if we pretend there's something that's neutral, we're lying. We're lying to the person we're talking to. So I have to always remember the person I'm talking to is made in the image of God, and therefore that image is still there. It may be marred, it may be scarred, it may be buried under a layer of deception and false teaching and everything else, but it's still there, and eventually I can find it, and eventually I can appeal to it. That's the contact point that I have. And so they are not going to be able to live their secular worldview consistently, and eventually you can discover where they are inconsistent and then use that to say, see, your worldview that gives coherence to your system doesn't work, and you're borrowing from mine. And mine being God's. It's not mine, I didn't define it. You're borrowing from God's worldview. And because outside of that worldview, they are going to, they don't have any meaningful basis for identity in the first place. If all you are is a cosmic accident, you're just, as a friend of mine says stardust. You're just a absolutely accidental conglomeration of stardust, and all that's going on up here is just bubbling and fizzing of chemicals. Then identity is not a thing that actually exists. You can't. you can't even communicate to me what identity is, because all you're trying to do is saying what's fizzing up there needs to fizz up here too. That's all there is. And most people realize there is much more to it than that. We recognize there is objective truth even if we deny it. When we walk out and get into our cars this evening, you're going to drive down the right-hand side of the road, because you know if you drive down the left-hand side of the road, you're not going to get very far alive. And so you can pretend there isn't an objective reality, but there is one, and you're going to live that way. You're going to live that way. Yes, sir. If I get anyone's gender wrong, it's because A, I don't have my glasses on, and B, you are all under these lights. And have you seen what people look like when you have light just coming straight down from above? We just tried to take some pictures. They're bad. So I can't, it's just sort of like, who's out there?
You were on the radio with that Todd Friel. You may...
Todd Friel? Really? I've been on the radio with Todd Friel? That guy's a freak. He's strange. He's very, very odd. That's a strange man. I wouldn't have done that purposefully. No, never. Sorry.
You were making a warning about taking away a Texas men's.
Uh-huh.
So at NIU, I went to go see Mr. Dan, don't quote me for a part. I asked him that particular question, that if he thought that one day, when he was speaking about the subject, churches will lose Texas men's status, especially on the basis of hate speech and the like. And his response was, it'll never happen. That what you have said is nothing but fear mongering. So, want to hear your comments on that.
Well, sure. Yeah, Dan Barker is the head of the Freedom from Religion Foundation up in Madison, Wisconsin. And I first encountered Barker on KFYI radio in Phoenix. Oh, my goodness. I was about 22, maybe, many moons ago. And we did a radio debate, and it was fascinating. But then a few years, I don't know what year it was. It was before 2010, I know. It was maybe 2000, somewhere between 2007 and 2009. We did a debate at University of Illinois. I think it was in Urbana. And it was obvious to me he hadn't even Googled my name. He had no idea who I was when we first met. I really enjoyed the presentation I made. I even had a graphic of him as a cosmic space broccoli, utilizing one of his favorite terms, and had a picture of him as he was. It was really cool. He didn't appreciate it, but I thought it was really cool. And anyway, and then we did a debate in Oregon the next year. And this is the famous "Don't Quote Me, Bro" debate, where it was supposed to be on did Jesus exist? Now you've got to get this picture in your mind. We are at a church where he has a book table. He asked to sell his materials out in the foyer, and he is selling a book out there that he has sold for 17 years, and it is for sale that night in the foyer. And so my opening presentation quotes liberally from a book that he is selling that night and has had in print for 17 years. I get about a minute and a half, 2 minutes into my presentation, and he stops the debate to object to the moderator. And he says, that's not the argument I presented. And I'm objecting to his citation of my published work. And the poor moderator, all he wanted to do was sit up there and keep time. The last thing he wanted to do was to get involved in this. I mean, you could his name's Ken, and I just see the look on his face like, oh no, this is not happening. He obviously overruled him, and I pressed on as best I could despite the interruption. But he knew, the reason he had changed things is he knew that what he was selling in that book, I could rip to shreds. And so he decided to change his whole approach, just for that debate. Though he was still selling the book in the foyer. That's Dan. Dan's very proud of the fact that he's a member of Mensa, that he's a concert pianist, that at one time back many, many years ago, he had helped design the routing of the railroads in the northeastern United States. He's obviously a bright guy. But his whole claim to fame is that he's a former Christian, that he's still getting royalties for music he wrote for children's musicals back when he was a charismatic traveling around with a music ministry. And that's what makes him, that's what gives him his position. I think what he's probably saying is he has little faith that what should be done will be done, because clearly, on his principles, churches should not have tax-exempt status. I think what he's saying is this nation is so hypocritical in regards to its foundations that will never happen. I can't believe he can say that, given what's going on today, given how many people have been dismissed from positions at universities already for just doing things outside of university time, for daring to express Christian opinions outside of university time. If giving $2,000 to Proposition 8 in 2008 gets you fired from Firefox, how far down the road is it before we see the exact same type of thing happening? Do you really think Bernie Sanders thinks that the churches should have tax-exempt status? I mean, sorry. Maybe he's just simply saying that it's too hypocritical, that it'll never happen that way. Look at Europe. Look at what has happened to the educational system in Europe, and ask a simple question. The churches that have received, well, of course, Europe's different as far as any type of tax-exempt situation is concerned, by a long shot, because they have state churches. And every one of those state churches is absolutely apostate. Absolutely apostate. I mean, there's not a shred of Christendom left in those churches. But when it comes to the educational systems, you do not have the freedom to express Christian positions in the vast majority of those situations. And so, let's see. Let's give it 10 years and see who was right. Let's see. Now, meanwhile, I'm not doing any more debates with Dan, because Dan has far too many attorneys and seems far too willing to use them. And so he scares me. He really does. They are the most litigious atheist organization on the planet, by a long shot. By a long shot. Oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, they are. Oh yeah, amazing stuff. Uh-oh. The man whose iPhone has allowed us to see the Word of God on the screens today. Yes, indeed, Ken. How do you know he's a homosexual? No, seriously. You suspect, or he says? Either. Okay. Well, look, if the person has specifically stated, I'm not understanding what you have to say, I'm a homosexual. Okay? That's different than if you're in a witnessing situation, and once you finally get around, you get around to the issue of sin, you get around the issue of judgment, it comes out that, well, I have same-sex attraction, or if they come at you with it as a identifying badge of who they are, and this makes you wrong, then obviously you're going to be dealing with a different set of issues than if you're dealing with someone who does not make that a badge of who they are, and it only comes up later in the conversation as a part of a real serious discussion of sin. All right? So you may, quote-unquote, suspect something, but until it is actually injected into the conversation, I think you have to be very, very careful, not out of concern for political correctness, but you may just be wrong. and until it's stated, there's no reason for you to complicate the situation by, throwing a complete hand grenade into the middle of it and having to, apologize for the next 15 minutes for what you just did. But let's say the situation, it's now on the table. If you're talking to a person who is demanding that the Christian faith modify itself and adapt itself to them, that's one path. You're going to have to deal with that before you can get to anything else. If you're dealing with a person who does not make that claim and actually does not fight with the idea that God defines sexuality and what's right and wrong, then you're dealing with the same type of an issue that if you're dealing with adultery, fornication, all sorts of things in their past as well. As I said this afternoon, for me, the key text in offering hope to the homosexuals, 1 Corinthians 6:11, well, 9 through 11, because of the very clear statement, such were some of you, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. And what that means is, it is not the unpardonable sin. There are some Christians who take Romans 1 and the giving over and will say, there really isn't any hope for a homosexual. There are those who take that perspective. I've encountered them. I've encountered ministers that take that perspective. I don't think 1 Corinthians 6 allows us to hold that position. Now, don't take me wrong. I do believe that there is such thing as judicial hardening, and I do believe that there can be people who are given over in their sin for the destruction of their flesh. But I don't get to determine who that is. I don't know who that is. It can be sins other than homosexuality. There are people who are given over in their anger. There are people who are given over in their despair. There are people who are given over to heterosexual lust so that they are destroyed as well. Can I tell by looking whom God has given over? I cannot. I am told to proclaim the gospel to everyone. I am told to extend that message to everyone. And unless I am violating the sanctity of that message and assuring an individual that they are of God's elect, as information I cannot know, then as long as I'm doing it the way the apostles did, and that is, for anyone who will repent and believe, here are the promises of God. As long as I'm doing that, then I'm being faithful, and I don't have to ask myself the question, has this person been given over, anything like that at all. So I see 1 Corinthians 6 as a bright ray of hope, because you look at all those sins that Paul has listed, all the way back to looking at incest itself. And the reality is that the washing that is provided by the work of Jesus Christ can cleanse any of those sins. Celebrating. Mm-hmm. Voice an opinion. We're not voicing an opinion. It's not our opinion. I struggle a little bit with just that. Yeah, well, Well, if you are put in a position, I think if you're put in a position where you are given the choice to either celebrate or be dismissed, I'm not sure that there's much of a choice that we have at that point. I can't celebrate. This is a gospel issue. Now, when I say that, hopefully you're asking, why is this a gospel issue? Because I don't see it in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 when Paul defines the gospel. This is why it's a gospel issue. It is a gospel issue because what the world is telling us is that we must deny the authority of Jesus Christ to define sin and his own gospel. We are being told that what we have to do is accept Caesar's authority in regards to what is proper behavior for mankind and reject Christ's authority in that area. Now, what I would suggest to folks, I see the hand there, what I would suggest to folks is, at least for now and for at least the foreseeable future, that may actually be a point of approach, or I hate to use the term point of attack, but I'm using that in a dialogue definition, to make that assertion, because it puts most people on the back foot. What I mean by this is, say to someone, why is it that you are demanding that I deny Jesus Christ? And the immediate response from the vast majority of people is going to be, I never crossed my mind. But that's exactly what you're doing. You're telling me that you and your governmental authorities, or you and your psychological authorities or psychiatric authorities, get to define what is right and wrong for a Christian and what is right and wrong in Christ's world that he has created, rather than Jesus himself. You're telling me that if I'm going to follow Jesus, I can follow in my church, I can follow in my mind, but only so far as you allow me to. And that you get to overrule him when it comes to these areas that he actually did address, because he said anyone who teaches someone to break even the least of these laws is least in the kingdom of heaven. He very positively said in Matthew chapter 19, you need to know these texts, have them memorized and be able to explain them, but make the case that you are fundamentally denying the authority of Jesus Christ, which, by the way, was considered a very important authority, at least it used to be in our culture, but it's not anymore. That will at least give you the opportunity of raising the issue of what the gospel is and Jesus Christ's centrality to it. And it'll probably buy you at least a minute and a half of shock, because these are the ones that are used to accusing us of, quote unquote, victimizing them. Now you're putting the shoe on the other foot. Oh, I know. No. What I was saying is using the approach that I just mentioned, was saying you are demanding that I deny Jesus Christ. In a personal conversation, will give you an opportunity to at least build your case and get past some of the initial emotion. I'm not talking about the governmental stuff. I know the insanity of gender confusion and the issues relating to it is a part of a fundamental revolution and utter degradation of the core of our society. There's no question about that. Yes, sir. Yeah, whatever you call it. Well, was it when I was on Skype or when I was in studio? That one was a whole lot more enjoyable. Mm-hmm.
And I think that as a Christian, you have to be loving and,
Mm-hmm.
whole rundown of all the attributes
Right. Yeah, he was an interesting fellow. You'll see in the second episode, if you get a chance to track it down, it's online. That at one point, because I was in the studio now, so they couldn't ignore me as easily. He said, "Well, I don't know how you can be against the transgenderism, because in Christianity, God is sometimes Father, sometimes Son, and sometimes the Holy Spirit." And so I sort of looked at him and said, "Sir, you really don't understand what Christians believe about that." And he was like, "Oh, really?" You could tell he was sort of disappointed. He's like, "Well, I think it's sort of cool that sometimes he's one and sometimes the other, and it's sort of like a transsexual, you know." It's like, oh. It was an interesting experience, especially being in the green room with some of these folks. It was because they had a guy on who was a former who lived. Remember, they had him on the second time I was on, except in studio. And so I'm sitting here, he's sitting over there, and we're just talking, and somehow the last one comes up, and he makes reference to me and rips on me. And his now wife goes, "Well, that's him." "No, that's not him." I was like, "Yeah, it is." Hi, It was a very, very interesting experience. The love issue, when someone says, "Well, we just need to love everybody." There are numerous ways you can approach this, but what all of them need to do is to get the person to seriously consider what biblical love looks like. And if you want to see biblical love, then it has to be defined by the biblical again. And that's what they're not doing. They're defining love on a human level, or a secular level, rather than the Christian level. If you want to see what love looks like, you need to see a bleeding, dying man on a cross and recognize that God's love put him there, because God's love is intimately a part of his holiness, his justice, and his wrath against sin. And so what I have often said to many people is that if you look at the cross and all you see is the love of God, you've only got one eye open. If you don't see at the cross, first and foremost, the holiness of God, the justice of God, and his wrath against sin, then you'll never see the depth of the love that is being shown by the second person of the Trinity in voluntarily giving himself upon that cross. And so there's all sorts of other ways to demonstrate that Christian love is perfectly harmonious with having righteous judgment. And in fact, it demands righteous judgment. And then in fact, it is unloving. You are not showing love for a person when you do not speak to them the truth in regards to what their behavior is going to bring about in their life. And you know what? This is where families are falling apart. Parents must have the willingness to endure the wrath of their children, the unhappiness, to guide them in the right way, to tell them the right things. Because if you don't tell them the right things, they're going to end up being permanently damaged when they go down the road that you knew they shouldn't have gone down. But the fact that we are now engaging, look, I matured. I grew up and became an adult. Not when I got married, but when I had kids. We had 4 years before we had our first kid. And we were just married kids. I mean, okay, yeah, there was some maturing that has to take place. A guy has to live with a woman, and a woman has to live with a guy. And there's going to be the clashes that result from that, because guys aren't girls and girls aren't guys. Okay, so I learned to have little miniature shoes all over my house. That's just what it is to live with my wife, okay? They're gone now, and we have other things, but that's just how it is. But until we had children, we were both still really kids. And once you have children, all of a sudden you have to engage in self-discipline, and you have to put somebody else before you. That little thing needs you 24/7, for crying out loud. And I have said many times, infant children are the best God-designed selfishness extractors ever made. Because they are a black hole of selfishness. You know, they just suck it right out of you, right into them. And then when they have kids, it gets sucked out of them right into the next generation. It's just, circle of life. Anyways. So it seems to me that we're losing that level of maturity in our society to where love causes you to do things you don't want to do. And sometimes it means telling somebody something they need to hear. But real love, real Christian love. Exactly. Again, they're made in the image of God. If you can really have the time to push far enough, they know that. They know that. They can see it. The world is having to do everything it can, throwing all sorts of deception at them all the time to keep them from really seeing what their own conscience is actually testifying of. Yeah.
Until today, I thought the word feminine meant heterosexual men that had feminine kind of, characteristics. Can you clarify that to me in the Greek?
Well, I think that's how malakoi is being used there. I'm not saying that every single time malakoi is used. For example, Jesus, the Gospels used at one point of malakoi in, what was the context? I think it's in one of Jesus' parables about people in leadership or something like that. In that context, it may be effeminate. But the point is there in 1 Corinthians 6, with its coordination with arsenokoites, that does seem to be the best interpretation.
Nowhere else, do you know of anywhere else where the Bible addresses men who are heterosexual, who have feminine characteristics?
Well, we are told, Paul says in 1 Corinthians that we are to act like men, which might be something relevant to that. Let me see here, search in Greek New Testament. Yeah, Matthew 11:8, add the parallel of NASB. Matthew 11:8, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing. Those who wear soft clothing are in king's palaces. And that's paralleled in Luke 7:25. That was the reference I was referring to. That's also malakoi. Might that be a reference to homosexuals? Some people think that it is. Some people think that it is. But it could just be the, luxurious life that some of those people experience and the things that they have. So, who knows? But other than that, I don't know of any specific text that would come across my mind other than the fact that we are told we are to, provide for our families and, do things like that. Yes, sir. Well, materials, I'm really bad on things like that. I'm not a real good bibliography type guy, to be honest with you. But the only thing that I would say is, like I said, I graduated from seminary not knowing what the 6 passages that we've addressed. I could not have listed them. Any child growing up in Western culture today, unless you lock them in a cave, is going to be assaulted by age 10 with all sorts of images and all sorts of rhetoric in regards to this subject. It may, God bless you, and my daughter is going to do the same, and I get it, I understand it. But I don't care if you homeschool, they're still in the world. And if they are going to interact with people of the world, we unfortunately are going to have to prepare them with wisdom earlier than any generation before us in our culture. That's a shame. That's a part of God's judgment. And but that's the society we live in, and that's what we have to deal with. How do you do that? Well, as a part of the discussion of the birds and the bees, the the emphasis we would have to add now that was not, when my parents had that discussion with me, they didn't have to emphasize, because it was already understood between us, that God made us this way, and there wasn't any question about transgenderism and homosexuality and all those other issues. We shared a common worldview that this whole area of sexuality was defined by God, and they did emphasize to me, and I'm thankful for this, they did emphasize to me that sexuality is a good and beautiful thing. That's one of the things that I think is being stolen from a lot of the younger generation, is without a God, sexuality just is. It's not special. It just is. And I went into marriage, I went into my high school years with a deep commitment in my mind to the idea that my initial sexual experience needed to be with my wife, because that was going to make it something that had transcendent meaning that would give blessing to the entirety of my life. If you don't believe there's such thing as transcendent meaning, and if you don't believe there's such thing as blessing, why bother? And you know what? That kept me pure for my wedding. And everybody in here knows that there were times in your high school years where you had the freedom and you had the opportunity and you could have found out what this was all about. And every molecule of testosterone in your body was telling you to do it. And the only thing that kept me from doing that was I had a firm commitment that there was something that God would bless about that relationship with that one special woman. If we're all just a bunch of animals, none of that has a foundation or basis whatsoever. And so I think for a lot of young people today, that special reality that I celebrate now 33 years later has been stolen from them. And that's a crime. It's horrible. It's terrible. But yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Alan Chambers used to be the head of Exodus International, which was a confederation of ministries that sought to assist homosexuals in transitioning out of a homosexual lifestyle, basically. And he himself identified as one who experienced same-sex attraction. However, he married and had children. And he put out a book 2 months ago, approximately 2 months ago, I would say. Well, last year, he shut down Exodus International and apologized to the gay community and said, if you have same-sex attraction, that's how God made you, and we've been wrong all along. And, of course, people like Justin Lee and others have just been celebrating. See, we've told you all along. It just absolutely fit perfectly into the meme, into the communication that they wanted to make to the world, that there is no such thing as a ex-gay person. Once gay, always gay. That is absolutely necessary to the paradigm. I did get the book. It could have been even as little as a month ago. I could look at my computer here and see the date that I purchased it. But I recorded it to MP3. I listened to it the next day on a ride. It was very short. And for those of you who don't know me, I study on the back of a bike. Well, now I study on the back of a bike and while running, both of them together. But I prefer the bike part. And that's how I get my reading done. And if I stopped doing that, I would never get anything done. So I listened to the entirety of the book, and when it finished, I was like, that's it? He did not even attempt to make an argument, a biblical argument for his position. There was no argumentation there at all. I was expecting, honestly, when we got to the end, okay, now he's going to go into the arguments there. There wasn't anything there. All it was a very brief, this is how I felt, this is what I experienced. One day, one of my people on my staff said this, and I just had to be honest with myself that I still experience same-sex attraction. We're not really accomplishing anything, and this is how it all went down. So there wasn't anything in regards to any meaningful substance to what was argued, which just simply tells me that the man never should have been in the position that he was in the first place, and that the leadership just sort of fell apart at that point in putting him in that position and allowing him to torpedo the whole thing. But I can't respond to any of his arguments because he doesn't make any. He simply, I took the time, I read the whole book, and he simply did not bother to make any meaningful arguments that I can interact with. Other than, well, I just think this is how God's made us, and we should celebrate how God makes us, and blah, 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 blah. And that was all there was to it. Yeah. Well, but he said he's living a lie when he denied that he was still experiencing same-sex attraction. But he does emphasize he still loves his wife, and so on and so forth. But it was really fluffy. I wish there was something more there so I could interact with it. But I was just like, wow, that was a waste of whatever it was I spent on that for Kindle. Yes, sir. Yeah, that LGBTQRSTUV thing is a very no. Most of it doesn't work when you think about it because he's pointing out when you think about it, we used LGBTQ, and you asked me, what does Q stand for? No. Well, some say questioning today. That's not what it's historically about. It's been queer. That's a term they use themselves. Queer Nation, we were, back in the around 2000, I think, we were passing out tracts in Salt Lake City at the General Conference, the Mormon Church, and Queer Nation showed up. And that is a term they use of their own sexuality, is they are queer, which means they don't fit into any parameters and don't want to fit into any parameters and are proud they don't fit into any parameters. But the specific question was the B for bisexual doesn't make any sense. And in fact, the connection between LG, okay, I get that part, all right. But B and T are completely different parts of the planet. And the question he's asking is, and I've brought this up, and I've been surprised at how many even Christians have said that's an invalid argument, but maybe they just didn't understand what I was saying. But if you affirm that bisexualism is just as natural to be celebrated, accepted as homosexuality is, then you have to open up the possibility of a polyamorous or polygamous relationship. Because for a bisexual to express the entire range of their sexual desire in a marriage situation would require minimally 3 people. Myself, the male object of my desire, and the female object of my desire. And that's 1, 2, that's 3. And I've been shocked because I've had even people that I know in my chat channel go, I just don't see the validity of that argument. I'm going, are you a math major? I mean, I don't get it. If you are a bisexual and you have desires from both, if you are limited to a 2-person relationship, then part of your sexuality will not be expressed. And so the government is telling you that you cannot be a whole person as long as you insist that to be a whole person, you must express the entirety of your sexuality. And as a bisexual, that means a sexual intimacy with a person of both sexes. And that would require 3. I'm sorry?
Well, but it'll even go beyond that, because what if you have two bisexual persons? No, seriously. What if you have, honestly, look, we have to deal with this. Obergefell opened this up. Blame Justice Kennedy for being an idiot. Because philosophically, he was. If you read that decision, I'm telling you something, it was written on the third grade level. It was written on emotion. It was not written with any kind of meaningful substance to it. And some of you are shocked that I'm saying that. How many of you have read Obergefell? No, most of us did not. I read it within 2 days of when it was passed. And all of the dissenting opinions as well. And it is all emotion. It's what are we going to do about the children of homosexual? They need to be equal, and they can't have people looking down on them. This is how you make law? Oh my goodness. And so that has opened the door. And so I can stand up here and say, if you have two transsexuals, I think that adds up to 4 is how that's going to have to work. And they've opened the door to it. We no longer have any objection to it, given what the Supreme Court has done. It's insanity. And I don't know the direction back other than God needs to bring a revival to this land. But it's insanity. It really, really is. And so I agree with you. I think that it would demand the allowance for multiple relationships for that person to be able to express their, in the dark here. Mm-hmm. You just made a motion toward Alan there. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, believe me, if you don't already subscribe to Dr. Albert Mohler's The Briefing, I would highly recommend that you do so. It's a daily, weekday podcast, a discussion of world events from a Christian worldview, and Dr. Mohler has frequently made the comment that those of us, he and I are very close in age, we feel like the ground is shifting underneath us, like we are experiencing a constant moral and ethical earthquake of tremendous proportions. And what we need to realize is our young people think that's normative. You know, when I was a kid, 1 year would be pretty much like the next. That's not the case anymore. They expect massive change culturally, in technology, in everything, from year to year. And it's hard for me to enter into that. It really is hard for me to enter into that. So I can tell you what I did with my kids, and my kids say it was valuable for them. But you know what? That was then. I mean, both of my kids will tell you that, because of my working in ministry, my wife and Alan worked together at North Phoenix Baptist Church when Josh was born, for example.
And she's now worked for, can you believe this? She's worked for what is now American Airlines for over 19 years. And that's how we have health insurance. I mean, my ministry is a very small ministry. We couldn't afford health insurance for Rich and I, even if we wanted to. So I spent a lot of time with my kids. And they will tell you that one of the things they remember most was I bought, and these were really cool back then. Now it would be an iPad or something, but back then there were the whiteboards, those little whiteboards with the erasable markers. And when we'd be driving around town or something like that, I would basically have Christian worldview lessons for them, and I would take current events that were taking place, and I would make application, and it wasn't, hopefully wasn't some kind of artificial, well, this man's like David and Goliath, and no, I literally talked about, fundamental issues about the fact that we are created in God's image, and that we have transcendent meaning, and really tried to instill in them a Christian worldview. We can't know what they're going to be facing. And I'm going to tell you something. Having grandchildren has changed me tremendously, because it's one thing to have kids, but when your kids start having kids, you start thinking long term. And you start thinking about when you're not going to be here, because that means you're getting over the hill. And you can fight that all you want. Oh, yeah, go ahead. That's good. We can fight that all we want, but the reality is there are more days behind me than there are in front of me. And I start thinking about what kind of world my little Clementine is going to be facing. And man, that forces me to trust God's ability to take care of his own. Because Grandpa can't do it. I'm not going to be here to do it. But at the same time, it makes me all the more energetic to try to do something, to be salt and light. And I try to look at that phrase, salt and light. What does light do? Well, we know what light does. If light is necessary for guidance and direction, and once God opens someone's eyes, they need to see light as to where they're to go and what they're to do. But salt functioned in the ancient world as a preservative. It slowed decay. Didn't stop it, but it slowed decay. And I just have to wonder if we, in Western society, which seems, as far as I can see, absolutely committed to self-destruction. I mean, that's the only way to describe it. It's self-destruction. We are seeing people who are just, their common sense has been ripped out of their brains. What can we do? Well, we can get really angry, or we can get really militant, or we can try to be salt. We can try, by spreading the light, to slow that decay. And if that means one person or two persons, our little sphere of influence, that's up to God. I think some of us are getting downright disappointed. We're getting downright discouraged. Because it's, when I first went to Australia a few years ago, one of the things that the fellow that brought me down there pointed out to me was, for years now in Australia, it's been plowing the rocky soil. And the victories are one person here and one person there. It's not the kind of, we used to have, you used to see more people being responsive to the gospel. And now it's much more of a person here and a person there. And we have to start getting used to living in that kind of a context where a lot of Christians have been living for a lot of time outside the United States, but now we're getting to experience it. And so I want to try to encourage believers to remain faithful. If we try to look around at people around us, if we try, man, folks, whatever you do, I appreciate when folks come up and they want me to sign a book or take a picture or something like that. Don't you dare ever get your eyes on me. I will fail you. Any man will fail you. If your eyes are not fixed firmly upon Christ and his gospel, no matter what goes on around you and no matter what people do around you, you are going to be in trouble in the not too distant future. And I try to do the exact same thing. People say, who's your favorite theologian? And stuff like that. I try to avoid all that kind of stuff, because that's the world we live in. And we need to find our encouragement on a daily basis. What's the command in 1 Peter 3:15? Sanctify Christ as kurios. And that's actually a quotation from Isaiah. It's sanctify Christ as Yahweh in your hearts. Set him apart. Make him Lord of every thought and every action and at the center of your being. And then leave the results of that to God. Because if you really do that, then the way you speak and the way you act is going to bring you into very strong disagreement with this culture around us. And you may have to suffer and suffer greatly. But you know what? If you suffer for the name of Christ, blessed are you. And we need to recognize that. Real quickly, we're running out of time. Well, like I've said, this is my understanding of that. I have talked with enough people now that I have talked with men. I've never talked with a woman about this, but I have talked with men who are faithfully seeking to serve Christ in a local church. They are not seeking to have the church redefine their beliefs, but they say, I experience same-sex attraction. I have never experienced attraction to the opposite sex. And I know that this is disordered. It is not pleasing to God. I do not want to act upon this because I desire more to please my Lord than myself. And so I'm seeking the help of God's people to live in a way that is honoring to Christ. And they do not identify themselves as gay or homosexual because they recognize that your desires should not be what mark you as a Christian. It should be your commitment to Christ. I have to accept their testimony that they have never experienced attraction to women. Do I believe they make up the majority of homosexuals? Not even the homosexuals say that. When you can get honest surveys, you will find the largest portion of homosexuals will point to an experience in their life as a youth that initiated. Up till that point, they had been like everybody else. But something happened. A sexual experience, whatever it might be, initiated that desire, and they have chosen. In fact, there are a lot of homosexuals that are angry when it is suggested that they are just mechanically determined. They want to be free to say, I choose this. Okay? So I don't think that the from youth experience of same-sex attraction is normative for any more than 10% of the homosexual community. But there are those people. And so I have to accept their statement that that's what they have experienced. But at the same time, I have to affirm. Many of them will say, and I've prayed to have that changed, and it has not changed. That cannot become a equal counterweight to 1 Corinthians 6:11. Because I've also spoken with people who have had it changed. Why doesn't it change for some when it does for others? I can't answer that question. Why are there people who, even as mature Christians, continue to struggle with sin in their life and temptation to other kinds of sin? There have been some great men of God who had quite an anger, had quite a temper, even to the end of their days. And they had to fight that. And it damaged their ministry. And they prayed that God would change them, but they continued to deal with that. And there are all sorts of other sins of impatience and greed or whatever else it might be. So, yes, I do believe that there are those who from the beginning experience that. And on a biological level, the theory has been put forth that may have something to do with overexposure to certain hormones at a point in gestation. That doesn't change the moral reality, because Shaquille O'Neal has the temptation to pride, arrogance, gluttony, and greed because he's 7 feet 3 inches stinking tall, and hence, as a result, will be rich the rest of his life. Okay? So he was biologically determined. That doesn't change the fact that from God's perspective, he needs to see that for what it is and live in a way that is appropriate in light of the reality of his physical being. And each one of us is in the same boat. There are people given great intellect, and that means they have a great temptation to look down upon those who do not have their intellectual gifts. Well, okay, that was biologically determined. At some point in gestation, more of their neurons got connected than other people's did. Okay? That doesn't change the morality of the situation. All right? Just one last one, because we're way over time.
It seems that the gay community is going to the Supreme Court to get legislation, which is enforced by government.
Yes.
How can a church protect itself from legal attacks? Many churches are modifying the doctrinal statements to include biblical definition of marriage. Should they also include a situation where someone who is openly gay wants to join the church? If they do modify their statements, does that in any way protect themselves?
I can't answer that question because I'm not an attorney and I don't know. Alliance Defending Freedom would probably be able to send you entire books on the subject, and probably their fundamental answer is going to be, we can try this, but given how the courts are acting these days where words don't have meaning anymore. I mean, let's be honest, the decision before Obergefell demonstrated that words don't have meaning. The court can make words mean whatever they want to mean anymore. We have entered into a period of substantial lawlessness. But I can tell you one thing. On any logical grounds, my church uses the 1689 London Baptist Confession of Faith, which specifically states marriage is a union between one man and one woman. We don't have to worry about it on that level because you can't join the church if you have substantive objections to the statement of faith itself. But will the government overrule that? I don't know. What they're doing right now, I can't find any logical, rational, or historical basis for it all. So I don't know. It's we simply have to pray that, look, the day may come when we don't have places like this to meet. It ain't the first time it's happened in the Christian church. Okay? It isn't. And that doesn't mean that Christ is no longer on his throne. It doesn't mean he's no longer building his kingdom. The reality is, I have preached in places far less comfortable than we're in, and guess what? The Spirit of God was there too. And so God's going to keep building his kingdom. And we may not get to have the lives of ease that we have had, but you know what? Might not be the worst thing that's ever happened to us. Might not be the worst thing that's ever happened to us. I hope this has been helpful to you. Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Sunday school will not be on this topic. Any of you who saw the dividing line I did earlier in the week, where I contrasted two different Muslim videos and discussed what that means and what that requires of us, I'm going to reprise that for Sunday school in the morning, which means you need to make sure that your phone is charged properly, okay? And then in the morning service tomorrow, I know many of you will have commitments elsewhere, but if you are free to be here, you're traveling or whatever, I will be somewhat reprising the topic in a concluding, summarizing way, because most of the members of the church here have not been here for the entirety of the conference or even portion of the conference. So we'll be in Hebrews chapter 13, and I'll be preaching from the text. The marriage bed is undefiled, but pornoi, those who engage in sexual sin, God will judge. And I do not think there is any question whatsoever on a scholarly level that any person reading the epistle to the Hebrews in the first century, every single one of them, when they saw the word pornoi in Hebrews chapter 13, would have included homosexuality. There's no question about it. You cannot argue that. You have to simply say, and they would be wrong to do so. But that was the original meaning. And so we'll be looking at Hebrews chapter 13 in the morning service, and then I get to fly home and see my wife and grandkids, and it'll be 15 years, and who knows what will happen after that. Something tells me that the G-ster over there will have some type of an idea for next year. He already came up with one that only he and I would have attended, so I sort of nix-made that one. But we'll come up with something, and maybe, who knows, someday you're going to find out that there are much better speakers than I am, and I wish you would discover that, because it would probably be better for you. But till then, I still enjoy the hospitality. So thank you very much for your all praise. Wasn't looking for that, but I appreciate it. Let's close our time in a word of prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we ask that you would make us to be people who are salt and light, that we would give ourselves, that we would recognize our own dependence upon grace and mercy and redemption and forgiveness, and that even as we address this difficult subject, even as we seek to find that proper balance between standing and protecting the gospel and yet then presenting it with mercy and grace to those who need to hear a message of hope, Lord, as we do that, may you be honored and glorified. Use us as your servants, we pray in Christ's name. Amen. Could you turn down the computer, please, so I don't pop everybody? Thank you.